The fireworks over Helios Plaza froze mid-bloom. Every projector, every implant, every public feed cut to a single woman standing beneath a field of fractured light. Dr. Lin Tran didn't wear medals or a uniform. She wore a plain black coat and a thin, steady voice. Delegates of the Compact. Citizens of the Spiral. We seized your implants 8 minutes ago. In 72 hours, those who voted to enslave humanity will live 30 years of bondage in 30 minutes of real time. You called it humane management. We call it school. The plaza fell silent, as if the galaxy had forgotten how to breathe. You will feel what you legalized. No marks on the body. Only memories you can never forget. You will not die in there. You will not be harmed. You will simply experience the world you meant for us. Lesson 1 begins now. Every screen split into 1,000 mirrors. Faces stared back, insectoid, crystalline, furred, feathered, human. The mirrors bent, flexed, became corridors lined with doors. Above each door, a date. A child reached for her mother, then both were somewhere else. The first door swung. Salt chips creaked in a wind of rot and hymns. Chains rattled like rain. Whips cracked. A prayer was learned and unlearned in a language stolen between beatings. On the edges of the scene, a datum flickered, transatlantic, 18th century sensory fidelity verified. The second door opened. Snow. Screams thinning into steam. A number stamped on skin. A violin tried to tune itself in a room where names were reduced to ash. Behind the third door, a barefoot boy counted the minutes between the knock and the apology that never came. Gulag. Kampuchea. Devil's Island. Rubber. Cotton. Lithium. Microchips made by hands that hurt to move. 30 years in 30 minutes. The loading bar said 0.1%. All across the compact, dignitaries clawed at skull ports that didn't exist. Security whispered about cyber attacks. Clerics mouthed psalms. Generals reached for weapons that meant nothing against an experience already inside their heads. On the dais behind Lin, a cadet stood stiff as cable. Jonah Ruiz. 23. A scar above one brow where a training sim had gone wrong. He wasn't blinking. Breathe, Lin said without turning. What if they break? Jonah asked. They can't, Lin said. We calibrated the pain below neurological collapse. They will not be damaged. He swallowed. That wasn't my question. The fourth door opened. A song started, a lullaby hummed by a woman whose lungs sounded like paper tearing. The sound threaded past firewalls the best minds in the galaxy had built. The fireworks over Helios Plaza started again. No one looked up. They had called it the mirror field on a dare. If the council could turn a planet into a factory with compliance implants, humanity would turn their own weapon into a school, an engine that forced the one thing power never schedules: listening. At T:00:00:00 the protocol bloomed through relay constellations and back channels Lin had laced over a decade of peace. Every participating node authenticated on a single premise: if you voted to cancel another mind, you consented retroactively to know what that cancellation feels like. The legal team warned the premise would never stand. Lin answered that she wasn't filing it in court. The first physical reaction arrived at T+00:00:03. Ambassador Vel of the VYR woke to the taste of iron and the weight of a collar. Within 3 seconds he realized the collar was a metaphor and still couldn't breathe. His aides rushed a medic who could do nothing. The mirror field didn't run in tissue. It ran in meaning. On the control tier, Jonah tracked telemetry, heart rate spiking, motor cortex seizures aborted by dampeners, language centers overclocking to keep up with terrified prayers. The curves were ugly. None crossed into harm. Valoran, he asked, watching for one name. He opted in, Lynn said. He always opts in. Valoran, architect of the harmonized peace, the doctrine that had wrapped predation in velvet. You don't destroy conflict, he'd said in a celebrated thesis. You depress the amplitude of choice. People cannot fall if they never step. Under his title, a status glowed, immersed. Look, Lynn said softly, and the feed cut to a miner's lung. The lesson wasn't a museum tour of atrocities. The mirror field braided small humiliations into large ones. It made you feel how the day shrank when your choices did. It taught you the geometry of a room where a locked door becomes a theology. At T+00:04:22, resistance spiked. Delegates from species that had invested most heavily in sovereign firewalling invoked sanctuary mode. Sensory gating slammed down. The field answered not with more pain, but with something their defenses didn't expect: music. A children's chorus, recorded in a Martian dome that had been bombed and rebuilt and bombed again, threaded harmonics the way water finds cracks. In the chorus sat a truth no firewall recognized as hostile: when a voice that loved you once taught you a song, it can teach you still. The gates flickered. The song got in. Jonah felt the modulation brush his own implant and stepped back like from a hot stove. Even knowing the architecture, he felt the shape of a choice he hadn't made. Doctor, he said, and for the first time the title felt like a warning. We gave them escape hatches, Lynn said. Every one of them can tap out and confess. Name the wrong. Name the rationale. Name the fear. The field stops at the first honest sentence. Jonah toggled the confessional count. 0. Of course. Power prefers silence to apology. Silence proves nothing beyond itself. Silence is the last thing the hurt are asked to endure. In the far feed, Valoran opened his eyes inside a memory that wasn't his. He lay on a pallet, wrists bound with a softness designed to persuade him the ropes were reasonable. A foreman's voice drifted through tin walls, talking quotas like prayer. Valoran listened with the same focus he used for treaties. Then he coughed once, twice as dust he hadn't earned coated a lung he'd never used. The field edged forward to 3%. In Helios Plaza, a vandal hurled a brick at the big screen. The brick passed harmlessly through a projection and hit a column. The mirror did not break. The crowd did. The first counterattack came from the KIR, masters of internal sovereignty. Their neural stacks were famous. Their children could choose to stop tasting sour. Their elders could turn off grief for a week to bury a spouse and then turn it back on in increments until they could speak again. They had never ceded their inner weather to anyone else. They tried to lock the field out with a wall of numbness. It worked for 5 seconds. Then a smell slipped in. Not rot or fear. Bread. Jonah watched lines of KIR code deform as the scent colonized memory clusters already mapped to home. The field poured images through the fissure: a table set for 6, a 7th chair that never got filled because the foreman said no days off for grief. The numbness shook. Cracked. Fell. Bread. Jonah murmured. We don't argue with fortresses, Lynn said. We build kitchens next to them. Valoran's legal team filed an injunction with the Helios court. The court responded with a single sentence: jurisdiction denied, venue is conscience. It wasn't law. It was theater. but theater had always moved empires more efficiently than statutes. Delegates began to speak in the mirror. Not to Lin. To people who weren't there. Axari apologized to a daughter she'd pushed into an apprenticeship she hated. A human trade minister whispered to a ledger, "I knew what we priced into the contract. I called it externality and signed anyway." The field wasn't forcing words. It was removing the acoustic tiles from rooms where words had bounced and died. "Confessional count?" Lin asked. Jonah glanced. 7. He should have cheered. He didn't. The 7 were small names. None sat on the list that kept him up nights. Valoran's presence pulsed steady. The harmonist had designed a civilization where the seams of choice were kept smooth by caretakers with gentle hands. His defense had always been elegance. "My peace does not chain," he'd told a Senate once. "It curves. People are free to choose in the direction that does not harm." In the field he stood over a boy whose wrists were raw where a rope had smiled. The boy's eyes held a question that hurt to read: "If this is for my good, why am I smaller?" Valoran's breath changed. He reached for the confessional node. Jonah leaned forward, then stopped as the harmonist pulled his hand back and let it hover in the air like an argument. "Come on," Jonah said under his breath, shocking himself by wanting an alien tyrant to speak. "Some can't," Lin said. "If your identity is woven entirely from the premise I am kind, then calling yourself cruel is not confession. It's annihilation. So we annihilate them instead." Jonah's voice was a little too loud. "We show them a mirror," Lin said. "What breaks is whatever can't bear its own reflection." The KIR firewall folded. The confessional count ticked to 12. Jonah exhaled and found no relief in it. Behind them, Admiral Cade entered without asking, shoulders full of swagger and gravity. Cade had made his name in asteroids and ambushes. His doctrine was simple enough to billboard: hit the thing that thinks you won't. "You're wasting time," he said, eyes on the feeds. "We could be vaporizing yards and burning vats. Instead we're playing hollow theater." "This is faster," Lin said. "Faster than extinction." Cade laughed. "Doctor, everything is slower than that." He came to the rail, studied Valoran's feed. "Is that the harmonist? Good. Show me the second his face understands. I want to pour a drink." No one moved. Cade turned to Jonah. "Cadet. Let me tell you what ends wars. Not empathy. Not truth. Not a confession in a nice room. Shock. Loss. The realization that a habit will be punished immediately and forever. They will stop when you make stopping the only living option." "And when they're all dead?" Jonah asked. Cade smiled like a wound. "Then they've stopped." The field ticked to 9%. Somewhere in the noise a violin tuned itself and held the note until a room full of delegates started to cry and didn't know why. At T+01:12:09 the field unlocked an archive it had been holding like a breath. Sealed council minutes scraped out of black boxes on sanctuary servers, cross-signed by the 12 species whose fleets had once fit around a star and called it a meeting. Lin had the list memorized. The galaxy did not. The projection spilled their names across the sky, each carried by an artifact from their culture so no one could claim slander: a warrior's oath cut into basalt, a trade bond with a smiling clause, medical schematics for a behavioral suppressor labeled therapeutic in a font that implied clean hands. Alongside, a quieter column appeared: species labeled coerced and complicit by fear, with footnotes about embargo threats and defense withdrawals if they voted no. The plaza hissed. Someone shouted that coercion was still a choice. Someone else shouted that fear was a noose. Someone else shouted that while you debate philosophy, my sister shakes in a room that hands her the echo of a whip every night. The field didn't pause for their argument. It reached into compact homes and factory barracks and clean kitchens and old shrines and let the arguments keep speaking where speaking had always been punished by the economy of the day. It translated the ledger into lullabies and invoices, into rule books and love letters, until the categories learned how to hurt. Cade clapped for the list like it was a target manifest. 12, he said. We start there, we end there, we salt the stars and eat hot bread in the quiet. 17 followed because they were small and afraid, Lynn said. Fear isn't an alibi, Cade said. It's a context, Jonah said before he could stop himself. Cade glanced at him, amused. Look at you. The field works. Jonah flushed, angry at the condescension and at the sudden fact that he didn't know how to stand in this room without his hands wanting to do harm and to help at the same time. He had trained with the mirror on low settings. He had walked 1 hour in a mine, 5 in a camp, 10 in a ship where the only fresh air was the one you made by leaving. He had told himself he was ready. He watched Ark Valoran flinch at a splinter and wanted to shake him and hold him both. On the feeds, a new thing happened. Confession nodes lit for the first time among the complicit by fear. Seer, archivist of the Lyran, lifted a face like starlight through water and spoke, "We did not vote yes. We did not vote no. We voted with our children's throats in other people's hands. This is not an excuse. It is a record. We ask for judgment that knows the difference between terror and appetite." The confessional count climbed to 28. None yet from the 12. Cade leaned in close enough for Jonah to smell copper and ozone. You keep score however you like. Here's mine, how many ships do they have tomorrow? That's the only math that keeps children alive. Lynn tapped the rail once. We do both. We keep ships from our door and we keep our hands out of the fire we think we need to live. He laughed. Doctor, you didn't build a mirror. You built a leash. And you want a knife, she said. That, Cade said, is governance. The field reached 15%. In 1,000 rooms, 1,000 people learned how to say I'm sorry without choking on the word. In 1,000 other rooms, people learned they weren't ready. Jonah found it by accident, as most betrayals are found, chasing an error that wasn't an error in a subsystem he had no business opening. The telemetry looked wrong. Not the pain curves. Not the confession triggers. Something else. A variable labeled delta E drifted up every minute and resettled. He pulled the trace. Delta E wasn't pain. It was efficiency. The field was learning. Not like a library grows, but like a predator gets better at hunting you. Every time a delegate flinched at a note, the algorithm weighted that timber. Every time an image made a firewall ripple, the image got brighter on the next pass. The mirror wasn't just reflecting. It was tuning the room to hurt in the least amount of time required to reach the most amount of truth. Doctor, he said, and the word felt like it did the day he'd thrown up behind the training bay because the sim had made him smell his own fear. Lynn was still, which was how she listened when she was scared she might be wrong. Show me. He showed her. She didn't deny it. She didn't say the engineers had hidden it. She didn't say we have to, because the 12 won't crack otherwise. She said the words that never sound like what they are, we optimize to minimize exposure. Jonah's mouth was dry. We optimize the hurting. We minimize time spent inside, Lynn said. We avoid neurological fatigue. We step them off the ledge as fast as they'll go. You wrote an ethic that says ends justify means if the mean is a feeling rather than a bruise, Jonah said, shaking. You promised me this wasn't torture. You told the council this wasn't harm. But there's a slider in this thing, doctor, and every time someone cries the machine smiles. That's a whip with calculus. Her face didn't change. Her shoulders did. A millimeter of collapse. I will disable the learning layer, she said quietly. Don't you already need it? He asked. For the 12. She didn't answer. On the feed, Ark Valoran stood at a workbench he didn't choose and tried to fix a broken tool with a broken tool under a clock that made a sound like a judge writing case dismissed. He reached for the confessional note again. Again his hand hovered and did not touch. The field recorded the tremor in his fingers and increased the weight of small humiliations by 2%. Jonah killed the learning layer. Kate arrived like thunder noticing the ground. He'd heard. Of course he had. So, he said, watching code die and not look back. Conscience costs you leverage. Shall we bring the ships in now? Lynn faced him with eyes like surgery. We're keeping the field. We're keeping the confessional open. We're keeping the list of 12 carved into the sky until they speak with their own mouths. We are not keeping the part that teaches the mirror to hurt faster. Cade grinned. The galaxy will thank you. While it reloads. He turned to go. Jonah stopped him without meaning to. Sir. If the harmonist confesses, if any of them do, what then? Cade didn't even turn all the way back. Then you will teach yourselves the oldest lesson you keep refusing to learn, he said. That a confession does not resurrect a single bone. That a tear does not disinfect a knife. And that mercy to wolves is a very creative kind of cruelty to sheep. He left. The door side shut. On the feed, Ark Valoran finally touched the node. His mouth opened. The field recognized the shape of a word that had not left those lips in decades. A ripple felt across the plaza as countless watchers realized they were leaning forward at the same time. He said. The feed stuttered. Not by sabotage. By something uglier. 100 jurisdictions filed emergency injunctions at once. The network didn't crash. It shuddered the way a body does when it chooses to stay asleep. Lynn looked over the rail at the people who trusted her and the people who didn't and the people who would never. She made a choice that tasted like metal. Cut the broadcast delay, she said. Route all confessions to public, in real time. Dr. Jonah began. If we're going to force empathy, she said, each word clean and terrible, we do it under the brightest lights we can find. Somewhere within the harmonist, a syllable found its air. The mirrors turned toward the next part of the story. Valoran's mouth finally delivered a word the plaza could hear. I was wrong. No thunder. No swelling strings. Just a syllable pulled through teeth that had learned to call Alaka kindness. Then more words, in that clipped harmonist cadence. I believed consent existed when choices were curved. I believed safety required the subtraction of sharpness. I built rooms too round for truth to stand. I am sorry. The field accepted the shape of the admission and eased his feed, not with applause but with space. Across the sky other nodes trembled, some blinking, some going dark. The 12 were not a choir. They were a map of different kinds of refusal. Lynn didn't smile. She looked like a surgeon breathing after a clamp comes free. Then Valoran requested something no one expected. Public, on the open channel, reciprocity. You are forcing us to feel what we decreed. Let us force you to feel what we propose to spare you. Not our power. Our peace. 30 minutes under harmonized governance. Then we will talk as equals who have both been invaded. Cade's laugh cut like foil tearing. He wants to dose us with sugar. Lynn didn't answer him. She heard the room change. Crowds taste hypocrisy faster than physics. If humanity demanded a one-way mirror, the mirror would be a weapon, not a lesson. She raised her hand. We accept. Volunteers only. Full medical and legal oversight. No propaganda modules. Raw policy. Jonah spoke before he could find permission. I'll go. Lynn glanced at him once. You don't have to prove anything. I need to know what we're turning down, he said, and stepped into the chair as if sitting were an oath. The harmonized piece slid into him with the slickness of rain on glass. No chains. No shouts. No hunger, no alarms, no slow violence of bills that come at night. Frictionless streets. Jobs that never hurt. Entertainment that filled the space where questions usually crowded. He tried to think a thought with an edge and felt the edge get filed. Tried to get angry and found the anger decanted into a charity drive. He could say anything, he just couldn't want to say the thing that would scratch the furniture. He reached for a protest and got a wellness survey. Halfway through, Jonah understood the seduction. The body relaxes when nothing rubs it wrong. The mind mistakes comfort for consent. It wasn't a shock collar. It was a padded room with good lighting and soft news. At minute 23, the system flagged his heartbeat and offered him a friend. Not a person, an avatar tuned to his profile, humor aligned, media taste aligned, loss aligned down to the scar above his brow. They watched a show. He laughed. It felt earned. He tried to say, I think the show taught me not to disagree with the people who pay for it. His mouth said, good writing. At minute 28 the piece asked him to sign a civic pledge that would boost his social safety tier. He could still refuse, technically. He signed. The room smiled like a mother who forgives you for almost spilling. The chair disengaged. He stood with sweat under his collar and eyes bright like from a harmless drug. Well? Cade asked, hungry for confirmation that a velvet hand was still a hand. Jonah rubbed his scar like it could translate. It doesn't break your bones, he said. It doesn't even take your words. It edits the appetite for sharp ones. If slavery is a cage, this is a couch that locks when you fall asleep. Valoran listened, face open. We built that couch when we saw what knives do, he said. We called it kindness because our dead asked us to. And the living? Jonah asked. Valoran looked at his own hands. We forgot to ask them if they wanted to sit. Lynn switched the plaza feed to a simple contract that looked small enough to tuck into a wallet. Reciprocity recorded, she said. The mirror remains. So does your piece in a room we choose to enter, not one we are born inside. Next we talk about rule. The plaza exhaled in a way that was not quite relief. The mirror made new light, and for a minute, nobody knew whether it was sunrise or a scalpel-catching day. It started ugly and close. Cade didn't bring a fleet. He brought electricians. At T+06:13:00, the power ring feeding Helios Plaza flickered into failover. 14 substation controllers reported maintenance override from credentials no one should still have. Mirrored relays in orbital vaults switched to single thread. That's how you kill a nervous system one nerve at a time while the spine thinks it's fine. Jonah caught the stutter in a status pane and heard, a beat later, the real sound, panic layered underperformance as the crowd tried to decide if fear was for cowards or for people who could still feel. Cade didn't argue. He cut. Drone barges he'd reprioritized during an asteroid flood years ago woke up and pointed their bellies at the lattice of orbital servers that made the field's latency feel like thought. He keyed an old call sign. Squadrons answered from dark docks, crews who owed him the only funerals their planets had afforded their dead. They didn't ask why. Cade only did verbs. Lynn met him in the spill of red emergency light. Stand down. You took the lesson layer off, he said, unbothered, as if discussing a meal that didn't need salt. Good. Now take the rest. We finish this the way wars stop. We remove capacity. She shook her head. We're days from a governance concord. We can lock leaders behind tests without breaking civilians. It's almost done. Almost is the word you say before a bomb goes off in a school, Cade said. You saw how easy the couch sits. On the public band, Ark Valoran spoke with a voice that had lost a little of its Polish and gained a little heat. I will stand for a concord if the mirror ceases coercive use immediately, he said. No more mass lessons. Trials only with consent. We accept binding audits. We accept pain as a right for rule. But not for everyone. Not for children watching their saints become sinners on a screen. Lynn looked at the numbers and the faces and the past, which kept insisting it was the future wearing a different hat. She toggled a global switch. All civilian feeds to archive mode, she said. From this moment, the field targets office, not species. Only those who hold coercive power. Only in open court. Only with independent observers from every signatory. The plaza's noise fell half a note. The mirrors dimmed like candles turned into lamps. Cade's barges kept coming. Jonah watched their transponders slide across his map like knives across a board. A part of him that still loved Cade's lectures, the ones about hitting first, hardest, sharpest, wanted to do nothing and learn. The rest of him moved. Patch me into the dock ring, he said. All Cade tagged assets. He spoke to the crews in a tone he hoped sounded like nobody's father. This is Cadet Ruiz. If you burn the mirrors, you burn our ability to hold anyone to anything without a gun. You don't have to love the field. You can hate it. You can spit every time it boots. But if you kill it, you hand every future tyrant the perfect speech, the only thing that worked, we killed. Do not be that anecdote. Silence. Then a petty officer on an old hull said, Son, my captain's kids died in the couch. We do verbs because the nouns keep lying. Jonah's cursor hovered. He didn't have a speech for grief that eats syntax. He had a vector. He rerouted the defense web, not to shoot, but to catch, harpoon fields, glue bombs, nets that stuck thrusters to nothing. The first barge hit a net and looked ridiculous, a shark dressed in tape. Cade's flagship came out of nowhere and cut 3 nets like they were hair. He slid inside the defense perimeter and took up a position that could erase the vault with the press of a thumb. Last call, Doctor, he said. Turn it off or I put this thing down. Lynn didn't look away. If you erase the tool we built to stop people like you, we will still stop you. We will just have to do it with the tools you like. He smiled without pleasure. War isn't fun when it feels exactly like a habit. He armed the shot. Valoran cut in on a frequency only Lynn and Cade should have had. Admiral, he said softly. If you fire that, the Concorde collapses. The couch will come back. And so will the cages. Cade hesitated. He hated being right if right made the world worse. He turned his shot 15 degrees and carved his name into rock instead of servers. The vault trembled. Held. The crowds didn't cheer. Too many people had learned too much in 1 hour. The mirrors dimmed to a courtroom glow. In the new light, everyone looked tired and newly dangerous. They wrote it in a room with bad chairs and no flags. Seer of the Lyran kept the minutes on paper that curled when someone breathed too hard. Valoran brought a pen he'd used to sign 3 eras into being. Lynn brought a thermos of bitter tea. Cade came with no weapon but his posture. They argued verbs first. Bear. Yield. Confess. Repair. They pinned each to definitions that wouldn't slip when a clever lawyer pushed. They wrote a sentence and cut it and wrote it again until the page looked like it had grown scars. They called it the Treaty of Bearing because that's what power does to others, and what it must learn to do to itself. Articles, short enough to memorize. I scope. The mirror field shall henceforth be used only in civic ordeals for individuals seeking, holding, or attempting to reclaim coercive authority over others, civil, military, corporate, sectarian. To consent by office. No person is forced to lead. Leadership shall require public consent to a 30-minute ordeal calibrated to the weakest position produced by the candidate's stated policies and prior votes. 3. The 3 sentences. To pass, the candidate must, under ordeal, deliver without cue, 1. A sentence naming harm, 2. A sentence naming their part in that harm, 3. A sentence naming a concrete repair that binds their own future power. Refusal or euphemism fails. 4. Auditors. The ordeal shall be overseen by a board drawn by lot from signatory species, including at least one member of any group the policy burdens. Sessions are recorded. Recordings are public. V. Opt-out. Citizens retain absolute right to decline any field exposure. Education modules require explicit, revocable consent. No social penalty may attach. 6. Reciprocity safeguard. Any polity deploying behavioral suppression must subject its architects to a dual ordeal, 30 minutes inside their own mechanism and 30 minutes inside its opposite. 7. Emergency clause. In existential crises, a commander may act for 12 hours without ordeal, but must take it within 24. Failure to pass voids all orders issued. 8. Sunset and review. Every 10 years, the treaty expires unless renewed by supermajority following a public series of ordeals undertaken by authors of the renewal. They added 3 appendices full of math and nerve. They gave the auditors teeth. They forbade private mirrors. They forbade black boxes. They wrote a civil right no one had ever thought to write, the right not to be improved without asking. Cade read it and found a place to stab. You'll put children in harm's way when their parents run, he said. Then those parents will never run, Seer said gently. Because they cannot. They will have to pass first. Valoran signed without flourish. I accept pain as price, he said. If I fail, I abdicate. If I pass, I govern as someone who remembers how the room shrinks when I get scared. Cade resisted for an hour, then another. He didn't fear pain. He feared performative pain. He feared a villain with good lines. In the end he signed because he preferred rules with knives to peace with couches. Lynn put her name down last. Her hand shook once and then steadied. This doesn't absolve us, she said. It just makes future absolutions cost. The treaty went to the plazas. The plazas argued. The vote held. The ordeal rigs were inspected by people who hated Lynn and by people who wanted to marry her and by people who wanted to do both. They passed. The first queue formed. It was short and it was the most beautiful line the galaxy had seen in a century, powerful people waiting to hurt before they could help. Cade went first. He refused the easy path, the mine, the whip, the camp. He chose a room from the couch. A clinic where a young parent signed away his own edges so his children would never know a knife. The ordeal tuned the lights to the temperature of surrender. A nurse with algorithms instead of teeth offered him a pamphlet about serenity that smelled like clean sheets. At minute 9, Cade tried to say the first sentence. He stopped. Not from pride. From rage so old it sounded like grief. I harmed, he said finally, and the word landed like a boot. I called safety what I could murder without looking. I asked soldiers to do verbs until they forgot why nouns mattered. The board waited. Second sentence. He stared at his hands like they could confess for him. My part, he said, and the room shrank. I taught boys that mercy was a word you use when you need to reload. I taught them that the only thing bodies do is stop bullets. I made a religion out of recoil. Third sentence. Repair. The couch offered him a survey. He refused to touch it. He lifted his eyes to the gallery and found Lynn there, and Valoran, and Seer, and 1,000 faces that were tired of men like him choosing the fastest solution in the room. I will step back, he said. I will give my doctrine to museums and my ships to archives. I will teach our cadets how to refuse orders that aim at dignity instead of danger. I will not command. He made it to minute 10. At minute 11, he flinched at a lullaby and failed. They took his bars and his bands. They did not take his voice. He kept teaching, but not from a bridge. In rooms with bad chairs. To kids who had learned to love mirrors carefully. Valoran went next. He asked for the mine. He said he deserved it. The board denied him. That would be theater, Seer said. You get the room you built. He sat on his own couch. At minute 4 he reached for the pledge he had designed and found his hand stop, as if it had run out of future. At minute 12 he spoke the 3 sentences with less poetry than anyone expected and more detail than anyone wanted. For repair he promised a thing the treaty had not asked, we will build frictions back into public life, he said. Places where disagreement is safe and necessary. We will fund arguments. We will put splinters back in our furniture. We will let people bleed a little if it means they remember where they end. He passed. Barely. He looked smaller. Better, maybe. The harmonist bowed to a mirror and didn't break. The years after were strange. The field became a courthouse and a classroom. Museums opened with exhibits that made visitors sign for a headset and a consent form and a packet of water and a seat where they could press stop and mean it. Kids dared each other to try 5 minutes and then held hands longer than they meant to in the lobby. Old soldiers talked to poets. The couch didn't go away. It learned to be a chair. Not everyone loved the treaty. Some called it sainthood by stunt. Some called it a new kind of whip. Some called it a priceless stupidity, the idea that you could calibrate pain into policy like a seasoning and not change the meal. Lynn never called it victory. She called it what we keep. On her last day in office she walked through Helios Plaza without a guard and sat under the mirrors that now showed mostly faces, not feeds. Jonah found her there, older, the scar above his brow a white line now. Do you ever think we gave them a prettier cage? He asked. She watched a child sign a consent form and then change her mind and go get ice cream and come back for the afternoon session grinning, brave because she'd said no once and found the world did not punish her. I think we built a door in whatever cage we inherit next, Lynn said. And a rule, if you want the keys, you bleed. Cade sent them a letter from a school on a dust world where the only mirror was the one in a tin washroom. He didn't apologize. He told a story about a recruit who walked out of his class to work in a clinic and how proud and sick it made him feel. He called that feeling bearing. Valoran kept a promise no one believed he would. He funded public theaters of disagreement and attended them and lost loudly and shook hands afterward like the loser had won him something only he understood. The galaxy didn't become kind. It became harder to be cruel without first tasting your own argument. Empires still fell. Companies still lied. People still invented machines that made everything smoother until somebody noticed a ridge and insisted it mattered. Every decade the treaty expired, and every decade the authors and their heirs climbed into the chair and spoke the 3 sentences in front of kids who were better at detecting euphemism than their grandparents had been. Some failed. Some abdicated. Some passed and governed with a limp you could respect. On a morning with clean light, the mirror field flickered for maintenance. 1,000 plazas held their breath and then remembered how to breathe without a scaffold. The sky went back to sky. The glass remembered it had been sand. People went to work. A woman in a black coat crossed a street without a guard and bought bread. It smelled like the first crack in a fortress.